Hello and welcome to Chapter 1 in Operations Management. So a lot of people when they get in this class wonder what the heck operations management is. And in here we're going to talk a lot about production, where we do the creation of goods and services. And operations management is the set of activities we go through to generate those goods and services. And basically we create value. We take things of lesser value and we add value to them. So operations management is actually one of the three main parts of a company. We have marketing and sales, which generate demand, production operations, which does the service or makes the stuff that our business is all about. And then we have finance and accounting to take care of the money for us. So it's a huge part of a business. So for instance, if we're at a bank, the blue block here tells us the operations management part. We have to have tellers and we have to schedule them. We got to clear the checks. We have to have facilities. We got to handle the vault and how we do that. We have maintenance of the building. We have security of the building and of the money, right? All that comes under operations. In a jumped around a little bit. In airlines, right? We have all the ground support equipment to take care of our aircraft. We have maintenance on our aircraft. We have all the ground operations, the food, the fuel, the ticketing, all of that kind of thing. The whole airport itself, right? And then we have the flight operations, all the things that has to happen in the air to keep the plane going, right? So there's a lot going on in terms of operations management. In factories, right, we have the facilities themselves, the buildings, the equipment, all of those kind of things. Production inventory control. How do we keep track of what's going on? How do we know what to do? Think of it as your class schedules and your professors offering your class schedules, right? We have quality issues to work on. Supply chain management. That's the stuff coming into the production area we'll talk about. It's like the food coming into the dining hall, right? If they don't have any food coming in on the trucks, then they have nothing to cook with, and then you guys aren't going to get to eat. Right. So also supply chain and bring your things in from your supplier is a very big deal. Right. And so we're going to have some couple chapters actually. We're going to talk about supply chain management and all the things we need to do. Like here we have a farmer as part of the supply chain. They produce some of the food. It goes to a production place. It gets packaged. It gets distributed, and then it gets sold. Right. That's the beauty of the farmers markets, right? It comes right from the farm to the table kind of thing and takes out those middle people. So why do we even bother studying this stuff? Because again, it's one of the three major functions of any organization. And even if you're not in operations management, if you're an accountant who has no idea or no thoughts of working in operations management, you need to know what goes on because it's the biggest part of your business, quite frankly. Okay. And most expensive. So what do operations management do? They do a lot. That's the general management stuff you've had in maybe in principles of management class, planning, organizing. They're doing the staffing, leading, and the controlling activities when they're happening. So that's where a lot of the management goes on is inside of operations management. So some of the things, really 10 main things we look at in operations management are how do we design our goods and services? For instance, McDonald's, right, designs very specific breakfast items that fits their kitchens. So they're not in there frying eggs over easy and toast for you like a diner, right? They have very specific equipment that makes very specific types of food, and so they match their offerings to line up with what they have in the kitchen to produce it with. All right, we're going to talk about quality. We're going to talk about process and capacity strategy. So that's capacity would be how big, right? How big does our dining hall have to be to feed all you guys? If it's too big, then we've wasted money. If it's too small, that's lots of problems. Location, where do we put businesses? Where do we put production? How do we lay out the inside of those? We've got some human resource issues anytime you have a lot of people working in some place. Supply chain, I've talked about. Inventory, right? We're going to build stuff and store it, or we got to store our incoming supply. So we'll talk about that, right? Turns out that's a major expense. So you can see there's 3 chapters devoted to that. We'll talk about scheduling and project management in here, and then probably won't have time to get to the maintenance aspect of things. That's sort of a learn on the job kind of thing more. So I'm going to go very lightly on that one. And then we have opportunities. We have jobs in operations management. So that's some of the things, particularly you management majors and BUED majors should be thinking about as we go through these things. What part of a business might I like to work in? What might I find interesting, challenging? And if you're more interested in challenge, then you'll excel, you'll do better, and it will help your career. You'll look better. We can think about this stuff's been around for quite a while. Basically, since the Industrial Revolution, we've spent more time getting much, much better operations management. The early production, the early assembly lines, those type of things. And when we can produce high quality goods at a lower cost, it becomes more, it's not just good for the manufacturer, can make more money like Henry Ford here making cars or whatever. It's good for everybody because more people can afford these goods and therefore the standard of living goes up. So I always think of operations management as helping everybody by raising the standard of living for everybody. Is it equal and fair how much we raise the standard of living for everybody? Absolutely not. But the fact is that the world standard of living is going up considerably. Frederick W. Taylor, one of the early guys who's known as this. This is sometimes covered in Principles of Management class, right? He's thought of the father of scientific management. He began the first real scientific studies. That's what they call it, scientific management. Things like motion and time studies. What's the best way to do a job? And he created a lot of efficiency principles. And basically, he had things like his 4 points that a manager should do. You should get the right employee to the right job, right? You know, the people with the small hands are assembling electronics. The big burly dude is shoveling coal and that kind of thing, right? Once you get the right person, you should give them the proper training. Don't just throw some tools at them and hope for the best. Give them the proper training, not only on how to do the job, but the best way to do the job. That's what number 3 is. What's the proper work method? What's the best way to do this job? And that's up for management to do some experiments and figure out the best way to do jobs. And then number 4, right, give them legitimate incentives like bonuses and things like that so they get rewarded for extra output. You can't just take advantage of your workers. You need to keep them motivated. Right? They do much, much better for you if you can figure out how to keep them motivated. Also famous is Frank and Lillian Gilbreth. They were there was a book and several movies about them. The movies are called Cheaper by the Dozen because that's the name of the book. And he was basically the efficiency expert who figured out how to do this. By the way, it's cheaper by the dozen because they had 12 kids, because Frank said things are sold in the stores by the dozen. You get a discount if you buy a dozen of things back then. So having 12 kids was his idea. I don't think it was Lillian's idea, but she went along with it. Anyway, Frank died after fathered all these kids, and Lillian ended up using her degree and his theories, and actually as a woman in the early 1900s, going into organizations and helping them become much more efficient. And that took a lot of doing. She was actually the first woman ever to be awarded, I can't think of the name of the award. It's an engineering award. It's like Society of Manufacturing Engineers Outstanding Engineering Award or something like that. She was the first, and for a long time, the only woman to have gotten that award. Then you guys have heard about Henry Ford, of course, right? Henry Ford really stepped up the game in operations management with moving assembly lines and so forth. If you didn't know, Ford Motor Company built a special factory to build bombers during World War II. They're called B-24s, and it was a huge help to the United States. They built the plant from scratch in just months, right? The war's on, so everybody's hustling. And so the power of the Ford Motor Company was really able to help the U.S. War effort during the war. Deming, we'll talk about later. He was very big into the quality thing. He used his engineering and physics background to figure out how to do things from a quality scientific standpoint. The people in the U.S. wouldn't listen to him, so the Japanese figured out his stuff was really useful, so he started teaching it to the Japanese so the Americans would see it working and learn how to do it. And that's exactly what happened. So we'll talk more about him later. Operations management relies on contributions from lots of different areas, including economics, some physical, that kind of stuff. So it's good to know a little bit about everything. You see statistics second on the list here. I would remind you that business statistics is a requirement for this class. Don't worry, I'll review any statistics before we use them in this class. I know statistics is like a foreign language. If you don't use it, you lose it pretty quickly. By the way, so is economics. I'm pretty sure that economics is a foreign language, but that's neither here nor there. Talk about goods and services, right? Just to keep in mind the distinction. Services are these economic activities that are intangible. They produce an intangible product, like a haircut, like you taking this class. You going to the dentist, getting your teeth cleaned, right? Those are services. Interesting thing, they can't we usually can't inventory services. It's funny, I just thinking a little bit of this class we can because we're making recordings, but typically services are created right there in front of the customer. You order a pizza and we're going to make it and deliver it to you right then and there. And if you're going to buy a frozen pizza in the grocery store, right, that's a good, right? But ordering a pizza and consuming it right then and there would be a service. And I say there's very few pure services anymore. Mostly it's a combination of goods and services together. And then goods, right, are the manufacture of a tangible product, right? And again, because it's a tangible product, the beauty of that is we can often put that in inventory, or we can produce it in one place like China, and we can ship it to someplace else like the U.S. And again, the distinction is not always clear, and there's many things that are a hybrid of both. And of course, if you've had any economics class, you know that the services amount are increasing greatly. So in operations management, we try to make more and more of our examples not about like the world I came from of making cell phones. That's certainly a goods, right? I talk about things like services like healthcare and retail and restaurants, and I mentioned haircuts and things like that. Right, so we'll try to use a lot more examples in here about service because that's certainly the way where the bulk of the economy is. You've heard over and over again on the news maybe that service jobs tend to be low paying. That's what the first bullet says. Turns about 42% of service workers receive above average wages, right? So that's one in the plus category. The second last bullet, retail pays only 61% of national average. That's the problem. Right, so I would encourage you to be careful if you go in the retail industry. You want to work in management if you go in the retail industry. I mean, I have people, relatives of mine, whoever say, hey, I don't want to go to college. And I said, well, that's fine. But what you don't want to do is graduate high school and not have a skill, right? Because then somebody's going to stick you behind a cash register, right? And then you're going to be in this low wages sort of trap, right? It's very difficult to get out of that, right? I mean, learn how to become a plumber, learn how to, get your license to do hair, do something, right? Have a skill. Once you have a skill and you work in the service industry, right, you tend to do better. And here you can see that almost half the people are above average in pay, right? It's the unskilled service workers that really get the short end of the stick. And by the way, that's not going to change anytime soon. That will probably get worse as you have to compete with more and more unskilled workers. So you guys are doing the right thing. You're in college, you're learning lots of skills, and we'll learn a lot of things in this class. But if you know other people, that's my message for their future is if you don't want to go to college, fine. College isn't for everybody. But what skill are you going to get then? You need to have something. To be unskilled is really a tough path. In here, we'll talk a lot about productivity and how to get more outputs with the same number of inputs. That way we can have lower costs and people can have more stuff. Often I look at this in terms of in operations as this transformation, right? We have goods, we have inputs, right? And then we have outputs. And then transformation is what your business does. So my dentist has a building. He has a person who does all the health benefits and scheduling appointments and all that, right? And then the dentist himself, and the dentist has a license, and a hygienist, and she has a license and all that. That's the transformation. They're going to take your part of the input as the customer, and they're going to transfer that into this service that they do to improve your oral hygiene or whatever it is they're doing, right? So when I meet people and they want to say, oh, you're a business professor, let me tell you about my business I own, I ask them to describe this model right here. What's coming in? What do you do to it to add value, and what's going out? Okay? And by the way, when I say add value, I mean you have to add value that people will pay for. Right? And there's a feedback loop of how much goods and services, how much do we need, right? We got a closed loop. We can't just make stuff and hope for the best. We got to adjust accordingly. So for instance, so I thought you guys might find this one interesting. Starbucks, they stopped requiring signatures on credit card purchases under $25 because that saves 8 seconds a transaction, right? And so by doing that, right, that's a lot of transactions over Starbucks, right? So you can look at, so they save about $250,000 to $1 million a year just by doing small things like this. And to tell you the truth, I'm kind of surprised it's that small. It's probably a bigger number by now because God knows there's so many Starbucks and they keep popping up. This date is a few years old. Okay, so we're going to talk more about productivity in here and a little bit. We think of productivity as units produced per inputs, right? However many it is. If it's in a classroom, I mean, we college professors have a certain level of productivity, like how many students in a class, that would be people who pass the class or units produced, inputs used, that would be one professor teaching a class. Right, so you can measure productivity per things in different ways. Like here's one where we look at just labor hours used, and it's 1,000 units divided by 250 labor hours, boom, 4 units per labor hour. That would be our productivity. We call that single factor productivity because it only measures labor. It doesn't measure things like overhead. Were there any materials used? Did I consume capital goods? Did I use a bulldozer to produce these units? But that's not in the equation, right? That kind of thing. So that's what we mean by a single factor productivity. Multi-factor productivity is just the opposite. We include everything, including the kitchen sink, into our cost. So we take our output, however many units we made, divided by all of our inputs, capital, labor, anything we consume. All of that rolls up. So that's what we mean by multi-factor productivity. And here's just an example of lots of labor hours for this factor. I was trying to remember what this example was. So this is 8 titles per day divided by just labor hours, as opposed to we get a better way to do this. You can see our overhead went from 400 a day to 800 a day on the new system, but we can do 14 hours a day. So in terms of labor hours, it looks like a huge gain, almost twice as much, right? Because we didn't include the increase in overhead, right? So if we add the overhead into the cost and add the cost of the labor, right, we get a little different picture, which is still a very nice improvement, but it's not almost double. Right. So that's the moral of that story. So often by using multi-factor productivity, it gives us a better picture of what's really going on. Certainly we can have numerous measurement problems in terms of how we're trying to take our data and figure out what's really going on. And that's often in the real world a big challenge. So we hear about the cost of labor a lot in the news and why we're moving things to China, but really look at this. So that labor only contributes about 10% of a cost increase on products, right? Not a 10% increase, but 10% of the increase, right? Which is a very big distinction, right? Whereas the cost of capital, the machines you have to buy, the money you have to borrow to buy those machines, all that is a much bigger cost of what's going on. Right? And in management, it's a lot of overhead, but that's what you need to keep things organized so you know what you're doing. So what do we need, right? To have a good labor force, we need good basic education. We need actually, number 2, diet for the labor force is something you might not have occurred to you. I was in Mexico at a vendors of ours where they make products and for us, and work hadn't started yet. And I asked the guy, who are all those people in? He goes, that's the break room over there. And I said, oh, we were there early morning. And I said, what's going on over there? He goes, oh, we feed them breakfast. I said, oh, is it a good deal? He goes, yeah, it's a really good deal. We feed them breakfast for free. I'm like, you feed them free breakfast? What's up with that? And he said, so we, at this factory, it's a big factory with just thousands of people working there. He says a lot of people come from small little villages to work here in the factory, and then they're sending their paycheck home. Well, they're really dedicated family members, and they're sending home like almost all their paycheck to the point where they're not eating enough. So we started giving them free lunch at work, and output was going up. But the morning output was down because they're hungry, they're tired, they're hungry. Then we'd feed them lunch, and then we got more work out of them in the afternoon. So somebody got the bright idea, let's feed them free breakfast too. Now, I mean, you can feed people breakfast for pretty inexpensively, right? So anybody wants to can come in early and have a free breakfast. So then they get much more work out of their people. And the output is, not only is it the right thing to do for the workers, right? But the output is much higher than the money they would ever spend on this, inexpensive breakfast and lunch they're giving their workers. Right. So I was kind of impressed with that. So what's management doing all this? Management has to ensure the labor and capital are effectively being used to increase productivity, like making decisions, should we give them free breakfast or not, right? Right. So productivity in the service center, our book talks a good little bit about that, and typically it's very, the service center is very labor intensive. It's unique individual attributes and desires, like if you're cutting hair, right? There's no mass assembly line operation going on there. So it often makes it more difficult to automate these processes, and it makes it more difficult to handle the quality of, to judge the quality because it's not repetitive. Right. Interesting at Taco Bell, I left this example in there because these fast food places are, they're just the definition of scientific management, figuring out how to do everything with the least amount of effort, with the least amount of inputs. Why? Because they are repetitive, extremely repetitive, right? There's no going off the menu at Taco Bell, right? Go in there and ask for a couple of eggs over easy and see what they tell you, right? So because everything is so high volume and it's so repetitive, right? They do everything they can to take every half cent out of every operation, every second out of every operation. It's very important to them. So they're extremely efficient. Right, look at this. By just figuring out how to do these things the right way, they can cut preparation time by 8 seconds, right? They have these big numbers they can put up. They can cut the labor in their store. They can save water. They can save energy. They can save on trash, right? They're able to put up huge numbers the way they do this. Right. All right, that was my phone ringing. Sorry about that. So we have a lot of challenges these days in operations management, including ethics and how things are working in terms of making sure we are both keep the worker safe and keep society safe, and that includes with the sustainability issues of keeping society safe with the things that go on in our operations. Right, and then we have all these different stakeholders to consider.